Everyone knows Jack Nicholson's iconic performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But when this fan with bipolar disorder asked if Jack really stayed in a mental hospital for research, Jack revealed the personal truth he's hidden for 50 years. The Tonight Show studio was alive with its signature Tuesday evening energy in Manhattan. The familiar blue and gold lighting created that warm, electric atmosphere that had made the show a late-night institution for decades. Jack Nicholson sat across from Jimmy Fallon, both engaged in what appeared to be a typical celebrity interview about his legendary career and enduring impact on cinema. The Roots had just finished their smooth musical transition, and the cameras were rolling hot. Jimmy's iconic curved desk gleamed under the professional studio lights, while the New York City skyline sparkled through the backdrop windows like a constellation of Hollywood dreams and cinematic memories. Jack looked every inch the living legend he had become. At 87, he still possessed those penetrating eyes and that trademark mischievous smile that had captivated audiences for over 6 decades, though now tempered with the gravitas and wisdom that came from a lifetime of inhabiting complex characters. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, with his signature sunglasses perched atop his silver hair, he radiated the same magnetic intensity that had made him one of cinema's greatest icons. "So Jack," Jimmy said, his animated gestures punctuating every word, "you've given us some of the most unforgettable characters in film history. McMurphy, the Joker, Jack Torrance. How do you tap into that intensity? What's your secret?" Jack's eyes glinted with that characteristic blend of humor and mystery. "Well, Jimmy, the secret is there is no secret. You just have to be willing to go places most people don't want to go. You have to find the truth in the darkness and bring it to the light." The audience was clearly mesmerized by his presence and wisdom, several older fans in the front rows leaning forward with obvious fascination and respect. "And speaking of going places," Jimmy continued, "let's talk about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That performance, that character of McMurphy, it changed how people think about mental health, about institutionalization. How did you prepare for such a complex role?" Jack's expression became more thoughtful, more reflective. McMurphy was a character who refused to be broken by a system designed to break people. He was about hope, about fighting for your humanity even when everyone around you says you're crazy. That resonated with me on a very personal level. The conversation was flowing naturally, touching on his method acting techniques, his collaboration with Milos Forman, and how the film had become a cultural touchstone for mental health awareness. The studio audience was completely engaged, hanging on every word from one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures. "What's incredible," Jimmy said warmly, "is how authentic that performance feels. McMurphy doesn't feel like acting. He feels real, lived in. That must have required some serious preparation." Jack smiled, though there was something deeper in his eyes now, something that spoke of memories both illuminating and painful. "You know, Jimmy, people always ask me about preparation. They want to know the techniques, the methods, but sometimes the best preparation is just being honest about who you are." It was in this moment of reflection about truth and performance that a voice from the audience cut through the studio atmosphere with the raw honesty and vulnerability of someone who had lived with internal struggles most people never see. "Mr. Nicholson?" Both Jack and Jimmy turned toward the sound. In the 4th row, slightly right of center, a middle-aged man in his 50s was standing among the seated audience members. He had graying hair and kind but tired eyes, and he wore a simple blue shirt that suggested he was an everyday working person, not a Hollywood insider. His hands trembled slightly as he held what appeared to be a well-worn copy of the film. "Yes," Jack responded immediately, his voice carrying a gentleness that contrasted with his intense screen persona. "What's your name?" "My name is David," the man replied, his voice steady despite the emotions clearly building. "David Martinez from Chicago." "David from Chicago," Jack repeated with a respectful nod. "What's on your mind?" David took a visible breath, and suddenly the energy in the studio shifted dramatically. The lighthearted conversation about acting techniques and career highlights was about to become something much more personal, much more profound. "I wanted to ask you about the research you did for McMurphy," David began, his voice gaining conviction with each word. "I've heard rumors for years that you actually spent time in a psychiatric facility to prepare for the role. Is that true?" The studio fell silent. This wasn't just a question about method acting. This was someone seeking to understand the authenticity behind a performance that had clearly meant something deeply personal to him. And if it is true, David continued, his voice beginning to break with emotion, I need to know because I've been living with bipolar disorder for 20 years. And your portrayal of McMurphy was the first time I saw someone on screen who captured what it really feels like to fight for your sanity in a world that wants to medicate it away. The weight of his words settled over the studio like a revelation. Everyone present understood they were witnessing someone sharing their most vulnerable truth with a room full of strangers and millions of viewers. When I watched that movie, David said, tears now forming in his eyes, I see myself in McMurphy. I see the struggle to maintain your humanity when everyone around you is telling you there's something wrong with you. I see the rage and the hope and the desperate need to prove that you're more than your diagnosis. Jack sat completely still, clearly moved by the man's honesty and recognizing that this conversation was about to touch something deeply meaningful. So I have to ask, David concluded, his voice now carrying both desperation and hope. Did you really experience what McMurphy experienced? Did you really understand that darkness, or were you just acting? The silence that followed was profound. This wasn't just about acting techniques or career preparation. This was about the difference between performance and truth, between imagination and lived experience. Jack stared at David for a long moment, clearly struggling with a decision about how much truth to reveal, how much of his private self to share with the world. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of all performer's charm, carrying only raw human honesty. David, Jack said softly, I didn't just research madness, I lived with it. Without hesitation, without consulting producers or following any protocol, Jack Nicholson stood up from his chair and walked directly into the audience toward David. What I'm about to tell you, Jack said as he reached David's row, I've never said publicly in 50 years of interviews. David nodded, clearly understanding that he was about to hear something unprecedented. In 1974, when I was preparing for McMurphy, I didn't just visit psychiatric facilities for research, Jack began, his voice now carrying the weight of decades of hidden truth. I checked myself into one. The studio audience gasped audibly. This was clearly not what anyone had expected to hear from one of Hollywood's most private and enigmatic stars. I spent 3 weeks as a voluntary patient at a psychiatric facility in Oregon, Jack continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. Not as Jack Nicholson, the actor doing research, but as Jack, a man who was struggling with depression and rage and feeling like he was losing his mind. Jimmy had left his desk and was now standing at the edge of the stage, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something historic. The truth is, David, Jack said, looking directly at him, I wasn't just preparing to play someone who was fighting the system. I was someone who was fighting the system. I had been in therapy for years, struggling with anger, with depression, with feeling like the world was trying to break me down. The emotion in his voice was palpable, as decades of carefully guarded privacy gave way to unexpected vulnerability. Those scenes where McMurphy rages against Nurse Ratched, where he fights against being medicated into submission, that wasn't acting, David. That was me, channeling every frustration I'd ever felt about being told there was something wrong with me for feeling too much, for caring too much, for refusing to be quiet and compliant. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. This is a picture from inside that facility, he said, showing it to David and the cameras. Me, sitting in a group therapy session, trying to figure out how to keep being human in a world that wanted to make me into something else. He handed the photograph to David. I want you to have this, because you understand what McMurphy was really fighting for. Not just freedom from the hospital, but freedom to be authentically yourself, even when that self is messy and complicated and doesn't fit neatly into society's expectations. The studio was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of people being moved to tears by this unexpected revelation from one of cinema's most guarded figures. But here's what I learned in that place, David, Jack continued, his voice now filled with hard-earned wisdom. The system isn't really trying to break you. It's trying to save you from yourself. The tragedy is that sometimes being saved means losing the very thing that makes you who you are. The audience began to applaud, but Jack held up his hand gently. McMurphy dies in that movie, David, but he doesn't lose. He shows Chief Bromden and the other patients that it's possible to be human, to feel everything, to rage against injustice even if it costs you everything. That's not madness, that's courage. Jimmy, his voice thick with emotion, addressed both Jack and David. This is incredible. 50 years later, we're finally hearing the real story behind one of the greatest performances in cinema history. But Jack wasn't finished. He began removing his black jacket. "David," he said, draping the jacket over the man's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me through countless interviews where I've hidden this truth. Tonight, it goes home with someone who understands what McMurphy really represented. The right to be fully human, even when it's difficult." David, now wearing Jack's jacket, looked transformed, not by the expensive garment, but by the recognition and validation he had received from his cinematic hero. "And David," Jack continued, "I want you to know that every time someone calls mental illness a weakness, they're wrong. The strongest people I know are the ones fighting battles inside their own minds. McMurphy taught me that sanity isn't about being calm. It's about being truthfully, courageously yourself." He turned to address the cameras directly. "To anyone watching who feels like they're fighting their own Nurse Ratched, who feels like the world is trying to medicate away the parts of you that matter most, don't let them. The world needs your intensity, your passion, your refusal to be quiet when things are wrong." The show ended differently that night. No standard closing monologue, no promotional segments. Just Jack and Jimmy sitting with David as the credits rolled, three men connected by the understanding that sometimes the greatest performances come not from imagination, but from the courage to share your most authentic, vulnerable self. When the episode aired 2 weeks later, it became the most watched Tonight Show segment featuring Jack Nicholson in television history. The hashtag #DuckOneFlu trended globally as millions of viewers shared their own stories of mental health struggles and the importance of authentic representation. David became an unexpected advocate for mental health awareness, speaking at events about the importance of seeing authentic portrayals of mental illness in media. He always wore Jack's jacket to these appearances. Jack never spoke publicly about changing his approach to discussing his personal struggles, but those close to him noticed something different. In subsequent interviews, he began acknowledging the personal costs of his intense performances more openly, admitting that his greatest roles had come from his willingness to channel his own darkness into art. And every time "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest" was mentioned in interviews after that night, Jack thought about David Martinez and the moment he finally admitted that his greatest performance hadn't been performance at all. It had been the courage to transform his own struggle into something that could help others feel less alone. Sometimes the most powerful art comes not from imagination, but from bravery to share your truth. The night that changed everything wasn't about Hollywood glamour. It was about a legendary actor revealing that his greatest role had been born not from acting, but from survival. Jack had spent years guarding it,